Hello and welcome to the Hacking State podcast. This is your host, Alex Mershak. With me today is Jay Yang and John Bugnacki. Jay is the founder and CEO of Tacen and the chief architect of Project TXA. John is Tacen's deputy general counsel and the director of regulatory policy. Jay, John, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Great to be here.
Thank you for coming on. So I guess we'll just start a little bit by introducing people to what Tacen is, and that'll give a good idea about maybe why we might want to talk to you on the Hacking State podcast, because I think the work you're doing is very interesting and very important. It's sort of in the crypto space, but in a way, I believe you managed to differentiate yourself from a lot of the other crypto companies and crypto exchanges by the technical innovation that you have set up around it. So I guess we can just start with that. Jay, if you want to go first and just give us a brief overview of the Tacen project. Tacen.
Right. Yeah. No, all good. So like when I traded quite a bit since 2006, like when right after I got my first job, equities and things like that. And I also traded, crypto, and thinking about sort of like what kind of exchange I want to trade. There were a couple characteristics that I came up with. One is that it has to be fast. Like some of the crypto exchanges at the time when I started trading, prevented things like, logins from happening when there were a lot of activity, or, decentralized exchanges are, overwhelmed, that they were extremely slow. And then second factor is, it has to be non-custodial. So we've all seen what happens when we entrust money to some third-party agent like FTX, where they do irresponsible things with money, where they use it for their own financial engineering and things like that. So I mean, self-custody is absolute must in my view. And then the third thing is that for people who are familiar with crypto space, different chains are their own pockets of money, and they rarely can cross boundaries unless there is a centralized exchange or bridges, and they present security risks of their own. So the third aspect of the ideal, exchange that I would like to trade in is that it also has to be cross-chain. Otherwise, it's kind of useless, because then you can only trade in one chain, or you have to give up custody for it to be a centralized exchange. So those are three things that Tacen as a company is helping to tackle to build this exchange. And then as a part of sort of like public infrastructure we're building that allows for, exchanges to have non-custodial nature, we're building a settlement network that allows for cross-chain settlement. And that's the Project TXA.
Okay, so there's a few components to this, right? There's the non-custodial exchange, and then there's also the settlement network. Mm-hmm. And I think the real innovation here, and you can maybe describe this a little bit more in detail, is the fact that there's this almost hybridization that allows for, in principle, an increase in performance, or rather, like not a loss in performance, while also maintaining the security and the privacy of a traditional non-custodial exchange. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So, I mean, John can speak more on the regulatory side of it and how we design to make sure that this, kind of defensively protects the traders and then protects all the network participants. But yeah, absolutely. So one can think of the settlement network as this open architecture where the protocol is the same for all the other exchanges that build on top of it, so that they all build as a non-custodial exchange. They all build as a cross-chain. They can all benefit from cross-chain settlement and so on and so forth. So this open architecture, one could think of it like, what if Visa payment network were open architecture, right? And what if payment processors and banks and card issuers all know the rules of the game very clearly, and it's all transparent to a certain extent, right? So that's sort of like the idea behind the TXA cross-chain settlement network.
And this is what's so revolutionary and really serves a lot of the interests that we care about: freedom, autonomy, decentralization, because we haven't simply built a centralized exchange or a decentralized exchange trying to gate things behind us. That in addition to the users of the exchange that Tacen is building, Project TXA is creating really the infrastructure for the future of finance, the future of people being able to have absolute security that their assets will never be stolen, be able to express their own creativity, that there are types of exchanges and use cases for this incredibly high grade and revolutionary architecture that we haven't thought of, then they'll be able to do it.
Yeah, and so I guess for people that are less familiar with the crypto space, maybe not everyone listening is super plugged into the arena. When you talk about the importance of this cross-chain settlement, and when you're saying that this could be something like the future backbone of finance, are you imagining something like government-issued stable coins, or a US-backed stable coin or something along those sorts being involved in this process, where there's sort of a universal protocol for exchanging all of these various tokens, including variations of sovereign or semi-sovereign ones?
Yeah. So what's a very interesting point, I mean, of course, like this interesting point is that these blockchains, again, are kind of like isolated pockets of money where they rarely have transfer of money between the chains. And what the settlement network will allow is linking those blockchains in the context of like asset to asset exchange. So which, kind of segues into what you mentioned, which is, if stable coins are issued by either private organizations or states or whatever it is, usually they only pick one chain and it doesn't go to the other chains, or they have to like negotiate the boundary somehow. So what this would allow is purchase of asset that sits on another chain using a stable coin on another chain, or vice versa. So it makes that process incredibly straightforward. And it makes the settlement process incredibly straightforward. So basically one could think of it like, what if we break down the barrier that prevents flow of capital between the chains? And that's sort of like a larger implication that allows for, not only more like financial sovereignty, because like your extent to which you're financially sovereign it currently only extends to like how secure one particular network is, or how much money you have on one particular network, right? But what if you can cross the boundary, seamlessly and trustlessly? And that's sort of like another aspect of the settlement network that really benefits the average person.
Yeah, so I wanted to drill down a little bit on this aspect of security and privacy within the networks, because a lot of people that are skeptical, or maybe they're open to it, but they're critical of crypto as a space, always bring up these issues of either hacks or exchanges getting shut down, and depositors not being able to pull out their funds as reasons to be skeptical of the industry, let's say, in the least. And I see what you're doing as, or I guess I would ask you, do you see what you're doing as a way to reinstill trust in the crypto industry, and could it maybe assuage some of the fears of regulators?
Yeah. So I mean, of course, like legal side, John can opine more on it, but I think at least from the technical side, here's how I look at the problem, which is that what are the vectors by which all these frauds happen, right? Like the FTXs of the world and hacks, and like, for example, there's a story of one person, whose account in Coinbase getting hacked and losing $300,000 worth of Bitcoin because, well, Bitcoin's not insured. So, it's not insured by FDIC or whatever it is. So it's like, money's gone essentially. So when I look at those problems and I say, what amount of control these exchanges had that allowed this to happen in the first place? And so when I look at that, then first thing is, okay, they had custody over customer fund, and yet they failed to secure it properly. So let's make sure that it's non-custodial. I mean, I should have full control over money either way, but a lot of times, like the people that we entrust money to, they aren't even doing a good job. So that's one. The second part is, what about the, what are the things that can happen to a depositor's money? So one of the things that can happen is the account just can't get locked for whatever reason, right? I mean, maybe the compliance person is very vindictive and just hates your guts, on social media, and just makes up a reason, and you no longer have access to the account, right? And it does happen. It's a real thing.
Happens all the time.
It happens all the time. Customer support people also have tremendous amount of power over individual user account with perhaps millions of dollars of money in there. And so when go ahead.
Oh, I'm just going to elaborate on what Jay said, that and what's so unfortunate about the way that many current crypto products and exchanges, not only from the security point of view, but one of the main aims of blockchain is true sovereignty, true decentralization. And so at the point at which that, let's say, for instance, that someone or an entity or individuals have a problem with you in real life, that you can effectively be canceled and non-person, and that you're trying to use crypto to be able to be resistant against that, and be able to have a community of like-minded individuals, embracing that, not only the spirit of crypto, but ultimately of American democracy, everything that we are sold, the founding fathers fought for. And instead you go to crypto and has the exact same problems, or many crypto products, and has the exact same problems that we would find within the traditional financial system. And that's very worrying.
Sometimes worse. So to address your question about like, what are we doing? Like, yes, I think what we're doing is getting rid of these like whole classes of technical issues that creates these like hacks and, people that you entrust money to have overwhelming control over your money, right? Meaning like it's the classic, your listeners are very well educated, so they'll understand this when I say it's the classic principal agent problem, where the agents are not acting in the benefit or in concert with principal's, mission, right? Like what they want out of it. And so like by getting rid of those factors technologically, I think at least that creates a higher level of security. Then you can build on top of it internal controls from the exchange side and other things that they have to work around, right? Like meaning now that we don't have any control over customer fund, like that gives them a better sense of like, how can we make sure that the user experience is better? How can we secure the portion that we don't have to, that now exchanges don't have to worry about hot wallets anymore at that point, right? It actually makes their job easier, not controlling customer money.
In addition to that, the very big custody problem, one of the most exciting trends that we can see within blockchain right now is being able to do cross-chain swaps. And so we can do native cross-chain swaps so there's the huge various hacking or security or censorship issues within custody, but also the way that most, if not all projects do cross-chain swaps is either through a centralized custodian, which then undermines the decentralized control of your own funds aspect, or they're doing it through wrapping or bridging, which also leads to huge security risks for people and can undermine their trust.
Yeah, in short, like building technological solution and paring down some of the controls that the agents have over, your own money, I think will improve like overall, public's trust in, crypto guys take security and privacy a lot more seriously, because thus far we haven't really proven it.
Yes. So I wanted to then, I guess, use that to talk about my next topic, which is going to be the regulatory tumult in the United States right now. It seems to me like, despite the fact that a lot of crypto really got started here, I mean, America's definitely still at the leading edge. There are some other countries that are also doing quite well, but many of the major crypto projects, crypto exchanges are still at least nominally in the United States. And you would think that that would give us a leg up in terms of being at the forefront of this. But it seems to me like every single day or almost every day, I hear something about, the SEC fighting with Coinbase or something like that in the news. And there really is this persistent problem of a kind of tension, I would say, not only between the various aspects of financial regulation in the U.S. government, but also it seems within government agencies. You know, in interagency conflicts around how do we classify these various projects? How do we regulate them appropriately? What should be allowed and what shouldn't be allowed? Um, is there some kind of special treatment or carve out that's needed for this industry? And so I wanted to ask you guys a little bit about where you see the state of crypto regulation at the moment in the United States, and are you optimistic about the United States future in this regard?
Right. John, you want to?
Yeah, sure. I can get started on that. So as regards the current state of crypto regulation in the United States, it's you'll hear various words when you read articles about Coinbase or other exchanges or projects dealing with the CFTC or SEC, and that on the side of the projects that are either have enforcement actions against them or being investigated, and that those words are transparency, regulatory clarity. Because really in the United States, it's just unfortunately the case, at least in my opinion, that there isn't a ton of regulatory clarity. More or less what happens now is that we have a long and established series of case law that's related to the treatment of securities in the United States. And the case law is particularly expansive when a particular asset isn't covered by another regulatory regime. So there are many types of notes and loans that are technically securities, but because they might be covered by the banking legal regime or whatnot, then they're not actively regulated most oftentimes in a direct way by the SEC. The problem is that many of the tokens and aspects of the blockchain ecosystem are so revolutionary in certain ways and so different to many past vehicles that a lot of the existing case law is of relatively limited value, especially when a project spends, like Coinbase, for instance, over the years, they've spent tens of millions of dollars on attorneys examining this entire history of case law and saying that, all right, these are the types of projects that we can run in the United States in line with existing securities and commodities law. And the SEC says, okay, you're still being enforced against for operating an unregistered securities exchange, for engaging in the unregistered issuance of securities in the United States. And then many of these companies are understandably frustrated because not only they spend tens of millions of dollars in legal fees, but they have engaged some of the best securities attorneys in the United States and around the world to be able to deal with these government agencies. And all that they hear most times from these government agencies is, oh, well, come in and register and come in and talk to us. And then what happens? In the case of Coinbase and many of these other companies, they come in and provide them huge amounts of information. And then the SEC blanketly says, you have engaged in these violations. And then the companies will ask them, well, based on our entire discussion that we had with you and our own internal legal expertise and external legal expertise, how is this even possible? And they will simply say in most of them, I can't say all of them, but in most of the responses that you get from the SEC and CFTC, it will say the certain case law, particularly the famous case that many people are familiar with, like Howey, in terms of what are the characteristics of a security, or the Reeves test, is the test for a note that's subject to like securities laws. They will just say, well, these apply. And then they'll ask, wait, how do they apply? Well, it doesn't matter. We're going to be threatening you with extreme legal action and penalties, so you just need to shut down. And so in that way, there's no transparency that the case law really there is not advanced. And that unfortunately, the way that many regulators operate in the United States, seemingly, I'm not necessarily, it's necessarily my opinion, but many people believe that they consciously do this in order to give them maximum optionality.
Yeah, there's, I'm not as well versed in the legal sphere as John here, but there's also the matter of sort of the true nature of SEC's enforcement rights and how these things are done. Like, for example, SEC would go through administrative law judge, which has very different characteristics than the normal, normal judge in the normal court proceedings. So a lot of these proceedings happen in a very secretive manner, and they, like, do they actually have the right to do this is always a question. There's actually a Supreme Court case right now, one of them, that challenges the administrative law judge and whether they had the right to do certain things. And we'll see how that turns out. But it's like the SEC often case would go after small projects that they know they can just bully their way into paying fines or whatever. And I would say that the innovation is definitely flowing out of the United States right now. I mean, like, I can tell from my just personal network that people are just saying, you know what, like, I don't have the bandwidth or the time or money to do this thing of anticipatory, kind of like planning to fight a ginormous government organization.
And in the case of Coinbase, all that planning might not be enough. They could still say,
That's
well,
right.
You're still guilty somehow of these violations,
Right.
but we won't tell you even how you're doing these violations.
Right.
Until we either go to court, we can see how long and dragged out that process can be with the XRP lawsuit, which is still not finally resolved.
Yeah, and XRP, just amassed an enormous amount of money to fight this thing for a very long period of time. So they're okay. I mean, they might have to pay some fine or whatever, but small projects that just get started that are extremely innovative, they'll just say, you know what, I don't have millions of dollars. I'm going to go to El Salvador or I'm going to go to Dubai or whatever, right?
I mean, I've heard it before that generally that the selection strategy for targets seems to be kind of bimodal. They either go after the really big guys like Coinbase, who can afford to have these protracted legal battles and fight the fight. In which case, if they get a victory there, they get a nice trophy for the mantle, and or they go after these smaller firms because then they can just sort of squash them down one at a time. And it's just a nice, easy win. And they get to say, oh, we shut down this, suspicious exchange today, blah, blah, blah. Let me tell my boss.
And the worst part is that when they arrive at a settlement, even without case law being established, they can refer to it and say, they did something and they admitted, that they were wrong and they settled with us, right? So that kind of gives like their sort of arbitrary enforcement action even more weight, even though, if these like small guys are actually like, fine, like we're just gonna like, we have like bona fide, case and we're just gonna fight, maybe they actually would have won and they have no case.
And there are many efforts.
You admitted your guilt, so
right.
Yeah, there are many efforts within the United States in order to establish more clarity. These come from associations like the Blockchain Association or self-regulatory organizations like the Global Digital Asset and Cryptocurrency Association. And they actively work with many responsive members in Congress who recognize that this type of technology is incredibly impactful for finance and a bunch of other applications, generate huge numbers of American jobs, tax revenue, et cetera. And it's just because of the lack of regulatory clarity is being driven overseas. I mean, in particular, you have people like Senator Cynthia Lummis from the state of Wyoming and Senator Kristen Gillibrand from the state of New York, who are collaborating with each other across party lines because in order to establish greater regulatory clarity to all of these issues in a bill that they have proposed and submitted, in order that we can have real regulatory clarity in the United States. And hopefully that will come because meanwhile, as Jay and you, Alex, are alluding to, that there are plenty of other jurisdictions like the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, the European Union, and others that are establishing real regulatory definitions that, for instance, what's even the difference between decentralized finance and like a centralized project? And as we discussed, there are very different risks and consumer protections that could be implemented, and actually laying that out rather than treating all projects in the exact same way and allowing them to be bulldozed.
Yeah, if I may add one more thing, I'll keep it really short about this, is that the real irony is that their stated goal is investor protection and then consumer protection. But what has happened is that they failed to find cases like FTX. They failed to find cases like Terra and Luna UST, disaster. Not only that, so like, for example, the the creditors for the Terra and Luna are actively being blocked by SEC's own effort to undermine the creditors. Like, meaning like creditors want 90 cents on the dollar, but because SEC is now going after these creditors for things that are unrelated to the Terra and Luna actions, that like companies like, for example, Gemini, or the companies that use Terra Luna surreptitiously, right? They just list it or whatever it is. When they lose money, they want to make sure that they give money back to their customers and creditors, right? But SEC is going after them for that very action of trying to recover these funds, which is unconscionable in my opinion. And it's like who are they really benefiting, right? Are they just going after it to collect fines, or are they actually trying to protect the consumers and retail investors, right? Because if they are, then they would just let this thing go and make sure that like everybody gets their money back, right? So
Right.
that's the irony.
Okay, so obviously there's a lot of problems with the various federal apparati that are engaged in this sector, but I'm glad, John, you mentioned the Wyoming senator, because you guys have chosen to locate Tacen in a state that is very crypto friendly, and there are a number of crypto friendly states now in the United States. People usually think of something like Florida. I think down here in Texas, we're kind of getting there. But Wyoming is also one of the others that not a lot of people necessarily are considering when they're thinking about the future of crypto and crypto generally in the United States. One of the nice things about the US is that we have this federal system, and this gives the states quite a bit of power to, shape the various kinds of industries that can thrive within their jurisdictions. And so I wanted to just ask you guys a little bit about the decision to locate your project in Wyoming and what it's been like working with the government there. And, what are your hopes for the future of the state in terms of its involvement in this space?
Yeah, I can talk about sort of like decision to move here, and that's absolutely right. In fact, a year before I even started working on this, I read a lot of news about, sort of like a pioneering work that legislators here are doing with Caitlin Long, who's, now, suing SEC, Federal Reserve rather, for a banking license related issue. But like, there are a lot of pioneering work that was done by folks like Caitlin and legislators here that makes sense at a fundamental level. Like, for example, you should be able to create a Bitcoin bank, or you should be able to create a DAO that because of its immutable nature, it should be used as a basis for like legal document publishing or something like that, right?
Being able to catch.
That's a decentralized autonomous organization for those
Correct.
who may not be familiar.
Right. So the DAOs, or decentralized autonomous organizations, are basically a smart contract code that allows people to split up assets and then use them for payments or hire contractors or things like that, which all of the governance type of actions that a normal LLC has or corporations have. So they're basically a code version of the the legal entity. So what Wyoming has done is, let's make sure that they're compatible. Let's make sure that when you create a DAO, that it's recognized as an LLC in the state of Wyoming.
And some of the main benefits of establishing a DAO, Jay was speaking previously about principal agent problems, meaning that if you are the owner of a particular amount of capital or business or an asset, and then you use that asset to be able to acquire a service or someone to act on your behalf, how can you assure that they're actually acting on their behalf? And there's a huge issue that's been explored extensively within American corporate law, is that how do you be able to establish an effective link between the owners of capital and the managers of a corporation or entity, and then the actual workers who work for the managers? Because oftentimes, and this has been well discussed and explored by many people, even like Carl Icahn, is that there are many managers who, rather than driving real value for the shareholders, they would rather enrich themselves or take things to contrary to shareholder value. And so what a DAO would allow you to be able to do is that, for instance, say the managers are going to take this action, you could actively vote on whether they're doing it, giving you sort of unprecedented control and greater efficiency. And one of the problems, as Jay was alluding with this idea, even though it's very compelling, is the fact that under certain US legal understandings that it could be considered a general partnership, meaning that there could be no limitation in liability, that all members of the DAO, if someone in the DAO did a bad thing or the DAO itself did a bad thing, that could be personally attributed to them. And so laws like the Wyoming DAO law are incredibly important because, or the DAO LLC law, because it helps to be able to combine this incredibly powerful and innovative new corporate structure enabled through blockchain with limitations in liability and other things that provide regulatory certainty for people who want to use this type of innovation.
Yeah. I mean, among those things, so those are the reasons why, I mean, the Wyoming folks here had no idea I was going to move here. Clearly, I'm nobody, right? So when I came here and looked at all those things, it was like a good sign that legislators care about sort of like, you know, innovating from the law side to meet up with the realities of the tech. And that really gave me, you know, a good, you know, positive feeling about the state's future. And yeah, that's why I moved here. And then, you know, when project really took off and we got some investment, you know, we located our HQ here.
And do you see other states following suit with this? Has Wyoming benefited from being open to this and being sort of at the forefront of establishing, I would say, industry-friendly regulation?
Right.
Do you see that Wyoming has become a model for other states to follow or emulate?
Well, so that I think, I mean, just being, you know, very like open about my take on it is that I think that remains to be seen, unfortunately, meaning that the laws were passed in 2018, I believe, or something like that. There were a series of laws that are passed, and the legislators really, you know, like took it upon themselves to make the legal environment more amenable. But the reality of the matter is that not a lot of physical relocation of businesses have happened. So it's a little like it's still kind of sour the the legislators in their mindset. They haven't seen a real like growth in, you know, high paying jobs or anything like that. We're sort of an exception, and there are a few other companies that have moved here that are blockchain related.
Yeah, Tacen, just for background for the viewers, Tacen, our worldwide headquarters is in Cheyenne, Wyoming, right in the downtown, a few blocks from a bunch of historic sites and the Wyoming State Capitol. And we have about 7 to 8 or so employees that work for us here. So we have like a real physical presence on the ground in the state. Of course, there are benefits that can be extracted in terms of being a big center for corporate filings. I mean, Delaware has obviously seen that. And Wyoming, actually, in terms of corporate filings, is the second highest for corporate filings in the United States as well. So I think, you know, with us and people that we've talked to, I think, you know, a lot, as Jay said, is yet to be seen. However, there are, particularly with our presence here and, you know, sort of stumping for the state and, you know, highlighting the terrific work that the Wyoming government has been able to do, that there are more people who are interested. And so in terms of like physical presence in the state, you know, that's yet to be seen. But certainly in terms of the influence of the regulations upon other states, many of the laws that Wyoming has passed have been pretty much copy and pasted in other jurisdictions. What really sets Wyoming apart, though, is that because it's a relatively politically unified state, and not only politically unified, but there's a common understanding across both parties that we want to do things that help to promote business and innovation. Unfortunately, in many other states, like for instance, Illinois or New York, this is just my perception, I think it's reflected in the laws and regulations being passed in those states, that blockchain becomes a partisan issue, and that if the dominant party is championing it, then it needs to be, or if either party is championing it, then it needs to be taken down. That's why we've seen somewhat draconian laws come out of New York, in particular toward blockchain. But for the more forward-thinking states like Texas and Florida, they're already just following the foundation that Wyoming has laid out.
This is sort of like a litmus test for like pragmatic governance and government versus like very partisan government, where you see that even though, you know, Wyoming is sort of like, you know, overwhelmingly Republican. There is a bipartisan action, and a lot of the, for example, stable token, act was like, co-written. These acts were co-written by the.
Do you want to give for the viewers and listeners? Do you want to give some background on the stable token, or is that a topic that you'd like us to
sure,
start?
yeah, I'd love to talk about the stable token. Let's get into it if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, so we spoke in support of this, and what the state is.
Well, maybe some background on what stable tokens are and all that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. that would be good.
Yeah.
So apologies. So what stable coins are and what stable tokens are is so when you think about Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever, their price versus dollar is wildly fluctuating, and the reason for that is because of demand and because of other things that are happening. It's somewhat similar to gold or silver, where it's become they are speculative assets. What a stable coin is a concept to flatten the price and peg it to a US dollar or euro or yen or whatever it is, so that the tokens themselves can be used as a meaningful means of like merchant transaction and things like that. So if I wanted to buy something online, if I'm talking about really a wildly fluctuating asset, then I might not want to use it for buying something, or that like I'm gonna regret it when it goes up, or that the merchant's gonna suffer because they transacted in something that went down, right? So like the stable coins are a means to like have a dollar pegged or something like that, and there are a lot of different mechanisms by which projects do this. One of them is sort of like what's called full reserve stable token or stable coin, where there is if I deposit $10, they create $10 worth of token, and then they hold that $10 in some like secure means, like a T-note, a treasury bill note or whatever, right? That's like a full reserve. And then there is a sort of like what's called algorithmically balanced stable coins that use a various trading mechanisms to ensure that whatever assets that they have roughly equals the amount of money that was initially deposited.
Another word for algorithmic stable tokens is radioactive waste. Stay away.
fair,
in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, so like,
one-to-one mapping, right?
Yeah, try to, right? But then the thing is that when a lot of the algorithmic stable coins holdings are, crypto themselves, you're talking about highly volatile asset class that also moves in tandem, because they, in the larger macroeconomic, perspective, they're viewed as a speculative asset entirely, right? Like, as opposed to like, oh, Bitcoin is stable, it's really solid, so they don't move down ever, right? It rarely happens that way. It moves, kind of together.
Yeah, and what's really exciting is that Wyoming, I mean, to our knowledge, is the first jurisdiction in the entire world when we talk about what you've said, Alex, about how the United States is one of the only countries in which there's really any form of true federalism, that states, even though there might be a larger political climate or something else going on in the world, that they can sort of maintain an independent identity. And that's what makes the United States so great. And that was ultimately the vision of our founding fathers and whatnot, that Wyoming is going to be the first jurisdiction to actually issue its own stable token, that even for many of the more secure projects, you can find that from Tether, USDT, or from Circle, USDC. There actually have been quite a few depegging events where the question arises, do they actually have the reserves to be able to maintain that peg? And so the Wyoming stable token, by being operated by the state of Wyoming and having the trust, like the confidence that that sort of thing has, and particularly in terms of Wyoming's historic leadership within blockchain, that it's a very, very exciting development and ultimately unprecedented.
And the important thing is that in the in the language of the mission of the Wyoming stable token, they say that it's going to be dollar backed, meaning like it's using a most conservative means to ensure that there is a full reserve, right? So if you deposit $10, it's going to hold that $10 in basically a treasury bill, which is, unless federal government collapses, you're going to be able to redeem it for cash, right? So as opposed to having a privately issued stable coin where you have $10 that turns into $10 worth of Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin price goes down, and like all of a sudden you don't have $10 that you can redeem. So there's a lot of like degree of transparency and control that Wyoming as a state government is making sure that it's available. So in some sense, like they're the ones that are more keen on sort of like transparency angle of this, right? Like so USDT, USDC, I have no idea what their reserves are. Terra, Luna, which was another stable coin that went belly up, no one knew what the reserves were. But in a kind of an ironic way, that this like experiments that are allowed by federalism is allowing for more transparent crypto, stable token essentially, and that's actually very good. That's, I think, like the governance experimentation at its finest.
And what's really exciting about this, two very exciting things about this process is that informally, because we're one of the few companies that's actually has a heavy physical presence within the state, and we have a lot of expertise not only in building our own revolutionary network for the future of blockchain and crypto, help out build Project TXA, and then the Tacen exchange on top of that. But with our presence here, we've been able to consult with several government figures on how this type of stable token should be architected. And what is really great about a place like Wyoming, like if you're an entrepreneur here, in terms of getting any sort of excitement, enthusiasm, people who support innovation, that because it's a relatively small state and jurisdiction, and because of their sort of pioneering mindset when people first came out and settled out here, breaking out of their existing mold and the way they were thinking, that they are very open to this type of innovation. And hopefully the stable token itself there's a commission that includes various figures in Wyoming on it, including the governor's office and treasurer's office. And Governor Mark Gordon, not only has he just done a fantastic job across many areas of governance here in the state, but is absolutely committed to this project. And we expect that ultimately it will launch sometime, probably either late 2023 or early 2024.
Yeah, but the upshot is that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, so I wanted to just real quick, I guess, linger on this point a little bit more. Given that you are one of the few crypto companies that has physically created a real presence in the state and has created jobs in the state and continues to engage very actively in affairs locally in the capital, how has that been received? I mean, do you want to talk, or I guess, would you talk a little bit more about the relationship that you've been able to establish in the state, sort of the level of access that you have by being there, and also, how important it has been that you made this this real commitment to actually, having a genuine presence in the state when other people are maybe, phoning it in or whatnot.
Yeah, so I can cover a little bit, and then John can speak more. I think the so access aspect has been great, but it's already because the state, folks like both on the legislation side and the administration side were already very open to citizenry overall. Like, for example, I can just go into the state capitol building and then just sit on any committee meetings. Like, I don't even have to sign in. I just go in there. And what's interesting is this is an open carry state. So
I'm not sure there are actual regulations governing that, but
so,
it symbolizes like both their openness and the security and trust that people have in the state, and the accountability that the government feels, because Wyoming is one of the few states in which, there are no metal detectors, there are no armed guards. And this creates a horrible perception, all across the world, when people feel that their leaders aren't truly representing them. And so that's something that Wyoming very much stands for.
And the government people here have nothing to worry about. They actually do a good job. So that's the thing. And so so that kind of is like an indicator of how open the government is. And because of the size of the government is small and they're very fiscally responsible, that they don't spend money on silly things, that we can sort of trust them. So this is like one place where like government is willing to engage with businesses and new kind of innovations, and they're willing to engage with average citizenry on a much more regular basis. So the access portion, I think, has already been there. We were just taking advantage of sort of the government's openness and administration's willingness to talk. And so that tells you something about small government, I think. And then the next part is that the sort of like the stable token, like the initiative, is not something that we started by any measure. This is something that state senators and representatives have started on their own, saying, okay, we have all these great blockchain supporting laws. How can we expand on it and benefit from it, right? And so like they're the one who started, and then we're helping them sort of like on the technical side in terms of like whether we get selected as a vendor or not. And so it's like the physical being here has helped us understand sort of like what would a active and government that is willing to experiment look like. That actually helped me understand it, because I went to Washington, D.C. is a completely different situation. And I lived in Illinois, and California is a completely different situation. I can't even I couldn't even get a hold of my own, representative when I was in California. So this has been a completely different kind of expectation of what a system that works and government is accessible could help like companies like us. And by the way, like we didn't ask or receive any kind of like freebies from state to move here, right? And they also respect that, meaning that the state government, is basically saying, hey, like, through policy and goodwill and good governance, they're seeing more businesses form rather than giving like free cash and stuff for big huge companies to relocate, right? So like our experience has been very positive on that.
Yeah, definitely. And I would say that in a similar way to having various leaders of the Wyoming government and then the members of the legislature, in the same way that they are very accountable to people, and in terms of the access that people like have to them, and in terms of their like governing of the state, because Wyoming is one of the few states that has an enormous rainy day fund surplus that's not rapidly being depleted like in many states right now. You also find that they're able to tell whether people are, generally committed, rather than being people who will just come in here and have some crazy idea and maybe get a blank check from the state, which often happens in a lot of other states for other industries. And what I think is really exciting, and I think this gets to the topic of the overall topic of your podcast, Alex, is that Wyoming, in terms of passing these type of laws, not only governing blockchain, because the Wyoming as a whole, blockchain and technology committee that regularly meets and comes up with new ideas and how to advance things. And so not only have they covered huge amounts of potential regulation or clarity for and new ideas for blockchain, but they're also now at their most recent meeting, which you can watch online, YouTube, the Wyoming Select Committee on Blockchain and Financial Technology, I believe it's called, also going into things like artificial intelligence and how can Wyoming be a fledgling center for that industry as well. And what's really exciting about that, not only the focus and the expertise that you have here, and the openness and receptivity of people in the government to these cool ideas, is that we can find that like if a jurisdiction wants to engage in this type of experimentation and focus when many national regulators and leaders are entangled with other things that they can't be concerned about really pushing toward decentralized technologies and whatnot, that you can have a different like set of states, both within countries, charter cities, and countries themselves, places like El Salvador or the United Arab Emirates, and really create a network of different states that is collaborating very heavily in this exciting process and moving forward, that people can learn from each other and be able to create a very positive feedback loop that's going to be able to help deliver us the innovations in both government, technology, and society that are going to lead us forward.
Yeah, I think that once the stable token, kind of coming back to the stable token a little bit, once that gets launched, and it's actually bringing in, like tangible benefit to business formation, capital formation, and like actual revenue to the state, other states are going to just say, yeah, we want something like that too. Why do we have to like, be left behind, right? And this is like something that is, something that is ultimately beneficial to them. And like, as far as like the us being physically here and creating jobs has actually helped us quite a bit in understanding like what are the needs for these like smaller or more like innovative states. Like for example, I like we didn't know that they were working on stable token innovation until we were invited for like initial like first like talk in support of it, and we did some research and was like, wow, this is a great idea.
Yeah.
So like I feel like our being here has been very much synergistic. Like we have access, but also we, through that access, we're hearing a lot of things that, they might not know how to do technically, but like we know how to do technically. So like we're able to bounce ideas and create new like structures for, state that I think could be like a good feedback loop for other states too. Like they'll see it and say, yeah, wow, this thing works.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one word that keeps coming to my mind when you're talking about the conditions on the ground and sort of the state's attitude towards governance and towards their own citizens and towards the industry is healthy.
Yeah.
I mean, which shouldn't be that like that big of a deal, but these days with so much misgovernance, just to have like a healthy government that isn't playing favorites, that is just making good policy and is inviting citizens to come in and take advantage of that policy.
Yeah.
It seems groundbreaking at this point because almost nobody's actually doing it anymore.
Yeah.
And in addition to all that as well, that they are focusing actively on helping to specifically encourage technologies that like blockchain or the responsible use of artificial intelligence that'll ensure that these type of policies continue not only in Wyoming, but to the extent that other states can either learn from Wyoming or individuals outside can tap into the structures that Wyoming has created, ensuring that's decentralized governance, financial future for people worldwide.
Yeah. And as far as like healthy government, I absolutely agree. I feel like, there is a meaningful difference between my experience interacting with folks here in the government compared to folks over there somewhere else, California, whatever. And I'll just give you really quick anecdotal evidence. I'm so sorry for this.
Sure.
Like for example, DMV, which is usually the worst of the government organizations. So in California, it was enormously difficult to do anything very simple. But here, like I had to just transfer the license. It was like, okay, come in one day. Just wait for maybe like 15 minutes, get the license done, right? So it's like a completely different experience in terms of like the government efficiency, and then like just even at the like rank and file level of I don't mean to pick depict a too rosy a picture. There's still government books, but like the rank and file members of the administration, meaning like the DMV, for example, they were extremely polite. They call you back and say, hey, like, you don't have to sit here and wait for us. We can just call you and then you can come back, right? So there's sort of like a level of like, togetherness, right? Like between the government and the governed, that I feel like this is something that should be like really studied hard and replicated across the board.
And one of the most basic things in order to ensure there's a foundation to build anything off fundamentally is safety and security. That we can see that given, in my opinion at least, if you look at the actions that the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, has taken in order to ensure the safety and security of his people, then wow, there's all these tech companies that are going down there, and the incredibly responsive attitude of the government, and just great things can happen. And similarly, in a state like Wyoming that takes safety and security and civil society very seriously, that it is benefiting a lot off that, I think, in the long term. And I think if other states want to pursue some of the stuff that Wyoming has and ultimately truly be able to provide for their citizens, they should ensure that, and they should realize that safety and security is the utter foundation of that. And similar to what you were saying before, Alex, in terms of healthy, we shouldn't have to think necessarily that safety and security is something that is absurd or that should be rare. I mean, it's the absolute foundation of a society.
Yeah, certainly. And I suspect there's something going on in my background, but I don't know.
That was a cameo.
Yeah. We have a guest appearance. Yeah. So safety and security, yes. And it's yeah, it really is just remarkable how simple, how very simple things can just ensure trust and get people to invest and get people to actually have hope for the future. I mean, this entire conversation you've been talking about, you know, what's going on with the stable coin and what's going on with crypto and the DAOs. And now you've alluded to like their development or their interest, at least in AI in the state. And I'm just thinking of like, there's got to be like some sort of like Wyoming futurism ideology that's developing where you'll get like silicon plains and you're just imagining these, you know, large complex megastructures in the middle of Wyoming. I think that'd be like an interesting aesthetic to explore.
The state vehicle is the Cybertruck.
Yeah, right.
Well, yeah, possibly. I mean, like, I feel like there's a, you know, like going back to some of the like criticisms that Peter Thiel had, which are valid, right? Like meaning like looking at like a past view of the future, Americans are going to work 30 hours, you know, we're going to be so productive that like leave rest of the world behind. I think that there's still a chance we can make that happen. I mean, I want to see the future where we can make that happen. And the thing is that, like, you know, I think that there's a kind of like, you know, states where no one pays attention to, or like, you know, where all the things are going wrong are on the sort of like, you know, California or New York or whatever it is. So like they're struggling to kind of like even just keep things working. And there are states that are, you know, all around United States where, you know, they're quietly innovating. They're quietly like trying to look at all these examples and say, you know what, I don't want to do that. Like, so like it feels like, you know, how Lee Kuan Yew, there was an interview where I think it was Charlie Rose. So it was like a kind of like a safe, you know, place where Charlie Rose would say very like easy stuff, but he would say like, what, you know, the question was like, tell me about your experience in United Kingdom and how that like changed your perspective on how like Singapore is governed. And he said, yeah, I studied in UK, Lee Kuan Yew, this was, and he said, I've learned all the right things, and I've looked around and I've learned all the things that we shouldn't do in Singapore. And then came back and just did exactly that. And so like, it's also like, you know, that kind of like knowing what not to do and just like knowing which road not to even take. I think that's a
and I really like this line of discussion and conversation, particularly focusing on places like Singapore, as Jay has, and Alex, you bringing up the fact that it seems like it would be a somewhat like unexpected place. Because if we look at the grand scope of history, at the places that have by far influenced the largest groups of people and the rise and fall of empires and the zeitgeist at any particular time. I mean, for instance, how influential was Judea during the Roman Empire? How influential was the Arabian Desert or like the coast on the Red Sea during the reign of the Eastern Romans and the Persian Empire? How important was Mongolia before the rise of Genghis Khan? So if we want to move forward and understand, or in particular places like Singapore, I mean, how important was Singapore, for instance? I mean, I understand it was a British naval base and all that, but like before, you know, Lee Kuan Yew or the UAE before they've been doing everything that they've been doing. So I would really encourage all of us to think about this point. I really encourage anyone listening to this that the places that determine the scope of the future, the places where there could be cities of the future, the greatest technological innovations, or new intellectual developments that really change mankind. In my view, they will occur most likely in the regions that you would least likely think they would occur in.
Yeah, in other words, we could have a giant tower in the middle of a country.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Space elevator.
this point, John, I'm glad you emphasized it, is one that actually ties nicely in with my previous conversation, which will be out by the time this recording gets released, with Cody Moser, who's a cognitive science PhD over at University of California, Merced. And we talked a little bit about one of his papers analyzing core periphery networks. These are basically networks where there is a centralized core, and then there are all these peripheral nodes. And it turns out that almost all the innovation in these networks happens on the periphery. And you actually need innovation coming from the periphery back into the central nodes in order for these networks to continue to be adaptive and not just be exploitive. And so almost all of the exploration of the explore-exploit trade-off happens as a result of the core's connection to the periphery. And so it's a very nice point that you made on that.
Thank you.
I wanted to I guess I wanted to lean a little bit more into kind of the future of Tacen and the future of your presence in the state. What kind of things are you guys working on? I know you're very busy building out the exchange right now. And sort of what are your plans and your vision for the future?
Yeah, so we're continuing to provide technical consultation whenever asked to Wyoming State on the Wyoming stable token. So that's part of it. But most of our effort is in, as you mentioned, building the hybrid decentralized exchange, which is a sort of like a centralized order book, but decentralized like settlement. And then also building the settlement network that other exchanges can build on top of. So that's like sort of like our primary goal. But my sort of like a long-term project is to then what else can we do with this open architecture cross-chain settlement network? One of the interesting idea that could pop up is what if when you're so let's think about like IPO space on the startup world. Like now, it used to be like during the .com bubble. Of course, it was a bubble time, but you could go from nothing to IPO within 6 months and go public, right? So like cost of going public was either low or it was underwritten by bubble economy or whatever it was, but it was fast. Now in the startups take about 10 years to go public or 10 years to get acquired or whatever it is, which means that because of the period of incubation is so long, that capital formation, in my view, actually, I think effectively slowed down, because until they cash out, they really can invest in more things or do something else, right? Like the startup founders, I think, like when they first start, like rather than young people having maybe like 5 different tries at a startup, now they have 2 tries, right? So which is not a good thing. It doesn't accelerate innovation or development or entrepreneurship in the United States. It actually discourages people, and people go work for Google or Facebook and they just stay there forever, right? So my vision and what I hope to build is what if we have a process that is completely compliant and legal, that makes it like from formation of the company to issuing and going public a lot easier process, right? Maybe instead of like it taking $5 million to do it, what if it's like 1/5 or 1/3? I mean, even 1/8 the cost, right? And now you're talking about something that is within reason for startups. Like if you raise 5 million, you don't want to spend 5 million going public. You want to spend like maybe 100,000 or something like that, right? So that's like one of the things that I think will be enabled by this settlement network that we're building. And how that's possible is, okay, one thing that there in the traditional finance, there's an enormous amount of cost of coordination between different organizations, right? Like when you issue a new stock, you have to get an underwriter, you have to do this, you have to do that, you have to get an investment bank and all that stuff. So I think that there is a way to like reduce all of that and automate that. And I think that's one part that we hope to help through our like kind of experience developing these systems. And second part is startups have a very limited a need in terms of like complexity in terms of like their corporate structure. So like there's no reason why it should take multiple years to go to public, just from the start of the filing process. What if it was all automated? What if it's, because these things are all like expectations from the government, right? So which means that you automate the things that are expected and make sure that they're, continuously filed and updated. That way, like you going from start of the idea to get an investment to going public could be as short as 6 to 9 months. And I think that would really change the dynamics in terms of like formation of capital, churn of the profit made from previously successful business into investment in the new. And I think that could like speed up and accelerate the pace of innovation in the United States, instead of like expecting founders to like pick and choose between two surefire ideas because they can only do two in their lifetime. Because by the time that their second one, succeeds or fails, they're 40 years old. If they have family or whatever.
In order to enable these types of innovations and developments, it's very key for the United States moving forward to have an approach toward the regulation of commodities and securities and banking, as unfortunately some of the Wyoming crypto banks like Custodia have encountered vis-a-vis the Kansas City Fed, is that they should embrace regulatory clarity and innovation and recognize that in this increasingly fragmented and decentralized world, that if the United States doesn't do it, another country will.
Oh yeah, but circling back to like, let's say that the policy mechanism is like just there's no action, right? Inaction. Then how do we make this vision into future? Is that you can't like, let's just start with the assumption that fine, like these tokens, like so technologies that speed up the going public process could use tokens to make sure that things are easier to keep track of and easier to like to like accelerate the process, right? Right now everything is paperwork, right? But what if a lot, greater portion of these like going public process is automated, and they're done through smart contracts, and then the securities are initially issued already as a security token? That's fine. Like there's a mechanism. Like, if SEC is already thinking every token is a security, then they have no problem with probably companies issuing correctly filed tokens that are considered securities, right?
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see where this develops.
Yeah, so where we're going with this, just hypothetically, and this is where like we're kind of developing towards, is that by creating these like automation surrounding issuance and linkage of entities, and then the linking the automation in terms of fundraising that files for the right paperwork and seeks out the right people, and then automation in terms of underwriting for the IPO process, and then hooking it up together so that they all operate on a open architecture. I think that, like I said, I don't have a substantial like evidence to say this, but I believe that those things combined together will reduce the time for companies to go public. So like right now, I mean that still happens right now, but it's all pink sheet, right? Like it's like like the companies that want to go public, they still file stuff with SEC, except they're just being traded in an OTCBB anyways. But what's the difference between that and a responsibly filed paperwork for a blockchain?
What types of with this type of potential use of blockchain technology may be combined in a certain way with artificial intelligence? I mean, many government agencies, it is true, they are overworked. They have way too much work or with not enough employees. And so this type of like automated system can help to be able to relieve this potential type of automated system. Could help to be able to relieve the burden on government staff, increase the efficacy of administration, and maintain the same quality or even a higher quality of consumer protection.
Yeah, and so those are things that I hope to show off at some point many years down the road. And those are some of the things that we're building these building blocks for. Like
as one final thing, do you want to go over the timeline for the cross-chain swap app and all that?
So like I'll quickly cover that, and I'm sure you have more pressing questions to ask.
Okay. So I'll just redirect this real quick.
Sure.
So let's go over, I don't know what you mean by this cross-chain swap app. I think you
Yeah.
mentioned something about that in the beginning, the importance of cross-chain settlement.
Yeah.
So we'll go over that. And then I have one more final question. You both have been very generous with your time today.
Yeah.
And then I think we can wrap it up.
Okay,
Sounds
awesome.
great.
Yeah, so by the way, thanks for opportunity to kind of like talk about what we're excited on, what we're working on. So cross-chain, so we have been building an exchange that is institutional grade, meaning like if they were to trade, at a institution, the speed and the how effective it is roughly on par. But what we've also noticed is that in the average, like not even people who trade on TD Ameritrade or whatever, because they still go through some like interface that is unfamiliar to them at the very beginning, right? Like buying and selling stocks. What does a bid mean? What does ask mean? What is a limit order, right? So, but most people who still want to like exchange assets one for another, so that basically swapping one asset to another, have a very simplified interface. And so what we're doing is we built this very complicated, but there's an API layer that allows for simpler user experience. So we're releasing the swap app. We're also releasing the exchange in case you want the full thing. But this swap app would allow things like hey, I just want to change my ETH on Ethereum for, Matic, which is on Polygon. How do I do that? Right now, you would have to go to centralized exchange and then, buy one for the other, and then you can then withdraw from, the exchange. But with the decentralized exchange and settlement network we're building, you don't have to deposit any money into any exchange. Like you just go from one network to another network, and swap one network's asset for another network's asset, and done. And you can just withdraw from there. And so this, I think, will allow, it creates an alternative for traders and swap, app users, and it'll be a lot faster process, lower fees, and all that stuff. So we're very excited. It's going to be in about 2 months, and we're launching in about 4 different networks. So Ethereum, Polygon, Arbitrum, and Rootstock. So these are networks that have been proven, battle tested, and we're deploying our sort of like smart contracts in these so that it can interact.
One other really cool thing that we're doing, because we believe so much in the power of decentralized technologies and networks, is that Tacen is going to be hosting an unofficial Urbit conference in the 3rd week of August. So if you are into Urbit, you can find that under Reassembly, or I'm sure that you can find under Reassembly on Eventbrite or via Jay's Twitter bio and all that.
You can. I mean, we don't have to go into so much detail there, but yeah, you can just go to Twitter and find out more.
Yeah, that means some good people. Have a nice time.
Yeah.
Reassembly 2023, Cheyenne, Wyoming, folks.
Yes.
There you go.
All right. So my last question for you guys, and you feel free to both give this a shot if you want, is for a normal person listening, someone who's maybe not involved in the space. Obviously, a lot of people that listen to the show are, frankly, probably in tech. They work in tech, or they're adjacent to tech in some ways. There's a lot of people listening who would at least be at a very basic level familiar with something like Bitcoin or Ethereum, but maybe they're not totally pilled on the real, I guess, insight or vision that some people have for decentralized finance. People like ourselves, I've been in this space into varying capacities for several years now, and obviously you guys are totally down in the trenches, about as far in it as anyone can be. So my question for you is, why should we care about decentralized finance? Some people, it seems like it's almost a casino game, or it's like, oh, you're just trying to create like a cyber bank or something weird like that. So what is your pitch on why, as human beings, we should care about decentralized finance?
Yeah. So I'll keep it really short. So I rarely pull race card, but I am of Korean descent, and I immigrated in 1994. And in Korean culture, there is a concept of peer lending. So meaning like, friends would get together and then they would just pull money in and then they would rotate and lend out money to, whoever needs to like start a business or just pay for something or whatever it is. And so peer finance, peer-to-peer, financing and lending is old as humankind. I mean, I'm sure that's just one example from Korean culture, but I'm sure there are other examples from, other cultures that are, a lot long ago or thousands of years ago. And I'm sure there are examples like that. So meaning like decentralized finance is the norm. That is the human origin. that we are going back to the roots when we say decentralized finance, because, having all these intermediary where we get some like efficiency benefit is a relative modern thing, right? So meaning, longer and longer ago, finance was all about between two people. We still have like complaint letters from this copper merchant 3,000 years ago. That's like become a meme where they complain about, hey, you gave me a poor quality copper for these coins or whatever, right? And so like finance and deal and lending, all of those things are, older than centralized finance. And in fact, that should be called finance, and this should just be called centralized finance. So I think that going back to roots on that, and where technology enables this, like removing a lot of these like mediation levels, actually, and allowing for greater like efficiency, because now technology is cutting along far enough where peer-to-peer financing and actual DeFi is all possible again at a lower cost, right? So I think that this is now going back to not only the historical roots, but allows for much more honest financial system, because now it's like finance at a human scale, right? Like, and I don't want to make it sound like a silly, like, a slogan, but like finance at a human scale, as in I need access to capital now. What options do I have, right? Whereas if it's all centralized, and there are very few options to access to capital, as opposed to if it's now disintermediated and between people that has a sort of like a release condition and lending condition all programmatically done, and it's easy to understand all that stuff, then access to capital becomes a lot easier. So I think that's why DeFi is important. Meaning, right now it seems like it's all just casinos. And frankly speaking, yes, right now it's all casinos. But I think that the promise of the DeFi is that by removing all these intermediation level, the cost of capital goes down, the access of capital goes up, and that not only that, it's much more honest form of finance. And so that's what I think why people should focus on DeFi. And like part of it is we started with money first, right? Like meaning like Bitcoin was a peer-to-peer, electronic cash system where it allows for trustless, payment, and reception and the store value and all that stuff. So like that is enormous, like incredible, like human achievement that now building, programs on top of it allows for, or in a different format, allows for this like a removal of central authority that one, like by the way, they can just lock your money, right? It could happen at any time. It happened to me a couple of times and I didn't do anything wrong.
One of as a brief addendum to that, I think Jay laid out the case very clearly and very well. As a brief addendum, one of the most important developments within the entire history of human experience has been the idea of the free and the sovereign individual. There have been periods in which sovereignty and freedom has been utterly crushed, and periods in which it's been more widely available and widely experienced. And in this type of period, ultimately, if you look at various trends around the world, the big threat that faces us is that with the centralization of a power, for instance, in the United States, with the recent bank failures within a few financial institutions, with the centralization of power rather than on states' rights in the United States, focusing on the expansive powers of the administrative state and the federal government, that is being threatened. And one of the most important things for you to be able to be a free and sovereign individual is that you have control over the assets that you own and that the people with whom you can interact,
Yeah.
that as the world has become more connected, theoretically allowing for decentralization, it's already also become more prone to potential censorship and control and domination.
Yeah.
And so something like we're building here at Tacen across the entire ecosystem of blockchain among responsible actors is giving you, the listener, the person who is engaging in the world and who cares about your own freedom and your own sovereignty, the ability to be able to actually do it rather than be a pipe dream or something just written down in a government document somewhere and that's not followed.
And there's ample evidence of this, and I'll keep it really short, is that when, so for an example, when Roman Republic as at its last throes, one of the egregious things that, opposing political parties did when they took control is, process proscription, right? Which is just marking these people's asset as now like state asset. They just stole it and then like auctioned it off to politically well connected, and
stole it after killing the owners.
Killing the owners
right,
too.
Right.
So I mean, sort of like this, like control over the asset and property is central to central to stability of the system, right? Like even if I didn't believe in the project of democracy or whatever, like the property rights is so fundamental that once you dismantle that, it's anything goes, right? Meaning
That's exactly right.
No one has trust, or no one would believe in the legitimacy of the system that willy-nilly steals assets. I mean, even now that's happening, which is like asset forfeiture, and all that stuff. And people, for saying the wrong things, they no longer have access to merchant account or bank account or whatever. And those things are like a very worrying trend, meaning like the sort of like this degree of control that chokes off like access to capital and merchant financing and commerce. And I think that for those people, lessons are obvious. Like we need rock solid non-governmental ways to access capital and ways to access money. And a DeFi, I think, argument should not just be, money, the number go up, but DeFi's argument should be, listen, like, would you rather have a system that how it works and rules are relatively consistent, because it's all published and contracts are there, or smart contracts are there, or would you rather have something that someone in some office can just say, this guy I don't like, gone, right? So I think that's like a relatively straightforward argument to make, and I hope that your listeners, if they were skeptical about like future finance and crypto, don't get me wrong, there are a lot of bad actors in crypto, but I think that over long arc of history that people who are genuine about like pushing the boundary of technology to get to that level of financial sovereignty, for even ensuring financial sovereignty would be a huge benefit to the rest of humanity. So I think that that's why people should care about DeFi.
Thank you so much for that. And this has been a great interview, guys. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to come on once again. So I would encourage everybody to check out Tacen. Go check out I guess Reassembly 2023 coming in August. And I think what they're doing up in Wyoming is great. So thanks for coming on, guys.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, Alex.
Yeah.
Stop this.